Isaac Newton was the greatest mind in human history. He discovered gravity, invented calculus, and revolutionized physics. But in 1692, something went terribly wrong. He stopped sleeping. He couldn't eat. He became paranoid and suspicious of everyone around him. His friends thought he was losing his mind. And maybe he was. Because for decades, Newton had been drinking mercury. Not accidentally, on purpose. He believed it would make him immortal. Instead, it was slowly destroying his brain, one drop at a time. The year was 1692, and Isaac Newton was falling apart. The man who had unlocked the secrets of the universe was now convinced that his friends were plotting against him. He wrote angry letters accusing people of trying to ruin his reputation. He couldn't sleep for days at a time. His hands shook uncontrollably. His colleagues watched in horror as the greatest scientist alive descended into what looked like madness. But this wasn't a mental breakdown. This was mercury poisoning. And Newton had been poisoning himself for over 30 years. To understand why Newton would deliberately consume liquid metal, we need to go back to the Renaissance. This was the age of alchemy, when the greatest minds of Europe were obsessed with two impossible goals. The first was transmutation, turning base metals like lead into gold. The second was even more ambitious, finding the secret to eternal life itself. They called it the Philosopher's Stone. This wasn't just some magical rock that could create gold. According to alchemical texts, the stone was the key to immortality. It could heal any disease, reverse aging, and grant the person who possessed it life without end. And mercury, that strange liquid metal, was believed to be the most important ingredient. Mercury fascinated alchemists because it defied everything they knew about matter. It was a metal that flowed like water. It was silver but liquid. It seemed to contain properties of both earth and water, making it the perfect bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds. If you could unlock Mercury's secrets, you could unlock the secrets of life itself. The most influential alchemist of the Renaissance was a man named Paracelsus. Born in 1493, he revolutionized how people thought about medicine and chemistry. He famously said that the dose makes the poison, meaning that any substance could be either medicine or poison depending on how much you used. But even Paracelsus, who understood toxicity better than anyone, believed that mercury was the key to eternal life. Paracelsus and his followers developed elaborate theories about mercury's role in the human body. They believed that mercury was one of the three fundamental substances that made up all matter, along with sulfur and salt. According to their theory, mercury represented the spirit or life force. By consuming mercury, they thought they could strengthen their own life force and achieve immortality. The process wasn't simple. Alchemists didn't just drink raw mercury. They developed complex preparation methods involving heating, mixing with other substances, and performing elaborate rituals. They believed that properly prepared mercury could transform the human body at a fundamental level, making it immune to disease and aging. What they didn't understand was that mercury is one of the most toxic substances on Earth. When mercury enters the human body, it attacks the nervous system with devastating efficiency. It binds to proteins and enzymes, disrupting the basic chemical processes that keep brain cells alive. The damage is often irreversible. The symptoms of mercury poisoning read like a textbook of psychological disorders. Victims experience tremors, mood swings, paranoia, insomnia, memory loss, and hallucinations. They suffer from excessive salivation, skin problems, and kidney damage. In severe cases, mercury poisoning causes complete mental breakdown and death. But Renaissance alchemists interpreted these symptoms differently. They saw the tremors and hallucinations as signs that the mercury was working. The mental changes were proof that their consciousness was being transformed. The physical symptoms were just the price of transcendence. Isaac Newton fell into this trap more completely than almost anyone. Starting in the 1660s, Newton began conducting secret alchemical experiments in his rooms at Cambridge University. He built furnaces, mixed chemicals, and studied ancient alchemical texts with the same intensity he brought to physics and mathematics. Newton's alchemical notebooks reveal the extent of his obsession. He copied thousands of pages of alchemical recipes and theories. He conducted experiments almost daily, heating mercury with various substances, trying to unlock its secrets. And like other alchemists of his era, he tasted his experiments to test their properties. This wasn't unusual behavior for the time. Before modern chemistry, scientists relied on their senses to understand substances. They would smell, touch, and taste chemicals to determine their properties. Newton tasted his mercury preparations hundreds of times over the course of 30 years. The effects were gradual but devastating. Mercury accumulates in the body over time, building up in the brain and nervous system. For decades, Newton functioned normally despite the growing levels of mercury in his system. But by 1692, the damage had become too severe to ignore. Newton's breakdown began with insomnia. He would go days without sleeping, his mind racing with paranoid thoughts. He became convinced that his friends were plotting against him. He wrote angry letters to colleagues, accusing them of trying to steal his work or damage his reputation. His handwriting became erratic and difficult to read. The most famous incident occurred when Newton wrote a letter to the philosopher John Locke, accusing him of trying to embroil him with women. This was completely unlike Newton, who had always been polite and respectful in his correspondence. Friends who knew him well realized that something was seriously wrong. Newton's physical symptoms were equally disturbing. His hands developed a constant tremor that made writing difficult. He lost weight and complained of stomach problems. His skin became pale and unhealthy-looking. He would sometimes stare off into space for long periods, as if he couldn't focus on the world around him. Now here's where you need to hit that subscribe button, because what happened next reveals just how close Newton came to complete mental collapse. The crisis peaked in 1693 when Newton wrote a series of letters that convinced his friends he was losing his mind. He accused the mathematician Samuel Pepys of being part of a conspiracy against him. He claimed that philosophers were trying to destroy his reputation. He even suggested that he might need to leave England to escape his enemies. But then, something remarkable happened. Newton began to recover. The paranoia slowly faded. His sleep patterns returned to normal. His handwriting improved. By 1694, he was functioning normally again, though he never fully returned to his previous level of productivity. Modern analysis of Newton's hair samples reveals the cause of both his breakdown and his recovery. Tests conducted centuries after his death show that Newton's hair contained mercury levels 15 times higher than normal, but the samples also show that mercury levels in his hair decreased significantly after 1693. This suggests that Newton either stopped or dramatically reduced his alchemical experiments after his breakdown. Whether he made the connection between his mercury consumption and his mental problems is unclear. His private papers from this period have been lost or destroyed, but something convinced him to step back from the dangerous experiments that had consumed his life for 3 decades. Newton's recovery was remarkable, but the damage was permanent. Analysis of his later work shows that he never again achieved the same level of creative brilliance that had characterized his earlier career. The mercury had taken away something essential, some spark of genius that could never be replaced. Newton wasn't the only alchemist to suffer from mercury poisoning. Historical records are filled with stories of alchemists who developed similar symptoms. Many died from their experiments, their bodies unable to cope with the toxic metals they had consumed in pursuit of immortality. One of the most tragic cases was James Price, an 18th century alchemist who claimed to have discovered the secret of transmutation. Price publicly demonstrated his ability to turn mercury into gold, amazing audiences across Europe. But when the Royal Society demanded that he repeat his experiments under controlled conditions, Price panicked. Rather than admit that his demonstrations were fraudulent, Price chose to poison himself with cyanide. His death revealed the desperate lengths that alchemists would go to in pursuit of their impossible dreams. Price's story shows how the pursuit of immortality often led to exactly the opposite result. The irony of mercury poisoning in alchemy goes deeper than individual tragedies. Mercury was supposed to be the key to eternal life, but it was actually shortening the lives of everyone who used it. The substance that promised to make people immortal was slowly killing them from the inside. Modern science has revealed exactly how mercury destroys the human body. Mercury atoms bind to sulfur-containing proteins in brain cells, disrupting their normal function. This causes oxidative stress, which damages cell membranes and DNA. The neurons that control movement, memory, and emotion are particularly vulnerable. The effects are cumulative and largely irreversible. Each exposure to mercury causes additional damage that the body cannot repair. Over time, the accumulated damage reaches a threshold where normal brain function becomes impossible. The person experiences the symptoms that Newton and other alchemists mistook for spiritual transformation. Renaissance alchemists had no way to understand these mechanisms. They lacked the scientific tools to measure mercury levels in the body or to understand how toxins affect the nervous system. They interpreted the symptoms of poisoning as evidence that their experiments were working. This misunderstanding was reinforced by alchemical theory, which taught that transformation required suffering. Alchemists expected their experiments to be difficult and dangerous. They saw physical and mental distress as proof that they were approaching their goals. The worse they felt, the more convinced they became that they were on the right path. The cultural context of Renaissance alchemy also encouraged dangerous experimentation. Alchemists worked in secrecy, sharing their knowledge only with trusted disciples. This isolation meant that they had no way to compare their experiences or learn from each other's mistakes. Each alchemist had to rediscover the dangers of mercury poisoning through personal experience. The pursuit of immortality through mercury consumption represents one of history's most tragic examples of human ambition gone wrong. These weren't ignorant people engaging in primitive superstition. They were often brilliant individuals like Newton, applying rigorous methods to solve what they saw as the ultimate scientific problem. But their brilliance couldn't protect them from the toxic effects of mercury. Intelligence is no defense against poison. The same analytical minds that could unlock the secrets of mathematics and physics were gradually destroyed by the very substance they believed would make them immortal. The legacy of mercury poisoning in alchemy extends far beyond individual tragedies. These experiments contributed to the slow development of toxicology as a scientific discipline. Each generation of alchemists learned a little more about the dangers of mercury, gradually building the knowledge base that would eventually lead to modern understanding of chemical toxicity. But the price of this knowledge was enormous. Countless brilliant minds were damaged or destroyed in the pursuit of impossible dreams. The history of alchemy is littered with the mental and physical wreckage of mercury poisoning, a testament to the human cost of scientific progress. The story of Newton's mercury poisoning also reveals something profound about the nature of scientific genius. Newton's breakdown didn't diminish his earlier achievements, but it showed that even the greatest minds are vulnerable to the same mistakes and delusions that affect everyone else. Newton's recovery from mercury poisoning was incomplete but remarkable. He lived for another 34 years after his breakdown, continuing to work on mathematics and physics while serving as master of the Royal Mint. But his most creative period was behind him. The mercury had taken away something essential that could never be recovered. The most disturbing part of Newton's story isn't what the mercury did to his mind. It's what modern scientists have discovered in his private papers. Hidden among his mathematical calculations and physical theories are detailed recipes for preparing mercury elixirs, step-by-step instructions for creating the same poisonous concoctions that nearly destroyed him. But here's what nobody talks about. Newton wasn't the only genius of his era conducting these experiments. There were others. Other brilliant minds, other secret laboratories, other attempts to achieve immortality through mercury. And some of these experiments were far more extreme than anything Newton ever attempted. What they discovered in those hidden laboratories would make Newton's mercury consumption look like child's play. The real question isn't whether Newton was poisoned by mercury. The real question is, what else was he trying to